It's the world's largest population, the second largest economy, it has one of the largest multi-currency reserves, the second largest military budget, the #1 trade power globally, but it's better known as the world's factory. These are just a few of the reasons that China has become a superpower. Now, if you're a regular viewer of VisualPolitik, you'll know that we've done several videos on this country. We've discussed its foreign policy, its debt issues, we've discussed how its companies have grown all around the world, as well as its political system. We've discussed Macau, Hong Kong. Suffice to say, we've talked a lot about China. And we have done so because we believe that nowadays it is impossible, as well as pretty inconvenient, to discuss international politics without keeping in mind this huge global player. However, in all of those previous videos, you could say that we've skipped a really important question. And that question is, really, how powerful is China today? Well, the good news is that's exactly the question we're going to be answering in this video. And we're going to do it from 3 different perspectives: military, economic, and political. And look, even though many people today think of China as the second most important global power, not everyone agrees with this, not at all in fact. Some experts believe that when China's potential is carefully examined, well, it's not actually all that powerful. But then again, there are plenty of other experts who state that Chinese power is growing at an incredibly fast rate and that the 21st century is most certainly going to be China's century. Now, before we get started, we should establish one thing first, and that's what exactly do we mean by power? Is it to have a lot of economic resources? And what about a big army? Or maybe it's actually to do with natural resources? Well, social scientists consider political power to be found in leverage and influence. That is essentially saying that power is the ability to shape and condition the events and actions of others. So the question now becomes, what is China's power? What do they have in order to leverage and influence other countries? Well, as I said a moment ago, in this video, we're going to examine the 3 main areas that most often deliver that power, and that's weapons, economics, and politics. And well, how about we kick things off with war?
The dragon's strength.
It isn't exactly easy to quantify the military strength of a country. It depends on several different factors. You have to consider how well protected the country is, if its soldiers are well trained or not, how modern its arsenal is, as well as a whole bunch of other factors. However, despite these different factors, we can still say that the spending on defense is usually the best way to measure the military potential of a nation. Further, when we analyze the money a country spends on its army, we also get some other relevant information, like how important a strong military is to the government. So, according to the official figures, in 2016, China spent around $146 billion on defense. But as you can probably imagine, China's government is not a shiny example of transparency, and some other sources indicated that the number could be closer to $226 billion. Anyway, whichever number is correct, we do know that China has multiplied its defense spending by 5 in the last decade, and it is today the second largest spending country in the world when it comes to defense spending, trailing only behind the United States, of course. 5 times, though. It's a significant increase in such a short period of time. However, this hasn't been disproportional compared to the country's GDP. Indeed, spending has been closely related to the economic growth of the country, having been kept within 2% of the overall GDP. And that is not the end of it. If we look at the public budget, we can see how defense expenses have dropped from 12% of the public spending in 2001 to around a little more than 6% in 2016. And can you guess what that means? Well, it means that China has made less of an effort when it comes to spending than the US when you consider GDP and public spending as reference points. So take a look at this chart, for instance. We already know 2 things. First, that Chinese military spending will keep growing at the same level the economy does, which will gradually shrink that difference with the US. Second, we know that military spending is only a small burden to the Chinese economy. We could say it is a sustainable amount, and if the government needed to reduce it, the government could manage to do so without too many problems. However, it's now important that we talk about military capability, because when it comes to Chinese military power, there are certain limitations.
What the dragon lacks.
China's potential to operate military force outside of their borders is actually pretty low. Unlike the United States, China does not have any military bases abroad, with the exception of Djibouti, as we will see later on. It also doesn't have that many allies either, or a logistic network, or satellites for large deployments. It actually doesn't have much at all. And then you must consider that they're also pretty inexperienced. I mean, it's been 40 years since the last time Chinese troops engaged in combat. But does that mean that China is some sort of paper tiger? Well, no, absolutely not. New resources are allowing Beijing to make important changes and investments.
China's growing military potential has changed the balance of forces in Asia, and the People's Liberation Army is now capable of conducting operations on a global scale.
China is making changes. They have reduced their military by 300,000 soldiers since 2015 and have focused on military upgrades and their ability to operate abroad. The Chinese army opened its first foreign military base in July of 2017 in the African country of Djibouti. Then in 2012, China bought its first aircraft carrier from Ukraine, and in 2017 they completed their first domestic carrier, with more to follow. It's also investing in missiles and its air force.
China has put into service its new generation J-20 stealth fighter.
Yes, it is going to take decades at a minimum for the Chinese army to come close to the American army, but there is certainly no other country out there with as much potential as China. And we all better get used to having to deal with China when talking about global military strategy.
The economic power.
There is no way to sustain any political or military power without economic capacity. But there's more to it than that. Economic power has its own great potential to influence other governments and large companies. And this is what is happening, for instance, with direct foreign investment, which is both entering and leaving China. As a pure financial figure amount, this is not actually very high just yet, but year after year, this figure has grown and grown. In a previous VisualPolitik video, we looked at how in the last few years, Chinese companies have started to invest money around the world. In 2016, excluding Hong Kong and Macau, this amount was more than $180 billion. Thanks to this, China has gained influence, especially in developing countries that have seen quite the opportunity in this Chinese money. And it's the same sort of thing with trade, but here China is by far the leading global power. And we're not just talking about Chinese exports here, we're talking about imports a lot too. Pay attention here, because Chinese economic growth has created a more prosperous middle class. Every day, more than 180,000 people leave poverty behind and become a part of the middle class that has enough money to, well, spend. And this, dear viewer, is something that has caused many multinationals to make China their #1 priority. That is certainly the case at BMW, where 1 out of every 4 cars sold by this company is sold in China, a country where sales are now 50% larger than in the United States. But there's still more. Asian assembly lines occupy several countries. For example, Vietnam may produce one component while another is made in South Korea, and later they are all assembled in China, the world's great production center. In the Asia-Pacific region, hundreds of thousands of jobs depend on trade with China. Okay, but not everything looks so good. There are problems too, especially when it comes to technology, design, and innovation, because, well, truth be told, innovation and creativity don't usually get on with dictatorships. But still, things are changing, and investment trade and multinationals are all things that generate a lot of influence indeed.
Growing political power.
Finally, there is political power. It's often said that China lacks leadership, and further that, unlike the US, which counts on solid allies all around the world, China is some sort of lone wolf. Now, this has been said for years, but do keep in mind that this is all beginning to change. China has bet on increasing their influence on global politics and is doing that to defend interests that are increasingly global. It is a clear strategy. The Chinese are using their large currency reserves to expand their influence. In the last decade alone, Beijing has loaned money to several governments and has invested all over the world, from Fiji to Madagascar. And that is not the end of it. They have also set up ambitious plans to achieve their goals. As an example, the Asian Infrastructure Investments Bank, a financial power controlled by China and based in Beijing, will reduce the influence of institutions like the World Bank, the IMF, or the Asian Development Bank, all of them controlled by Washington to some extent. And how about some more examples? Well, there's the New Silk Road, the One Road, One Belt, the largest infrastructure project in the world. Then there is the China Investment Corporation, a sovereign fund that manages more than $800 billion and invests in companies all around the world. And yes, we didn't make a mistake there, that is billion with a B. So now you might be wondering, has China actually had any political success with this strategy? Well, the answer is yes, they have, and that is well demonstrated in the country of Greece. China is developing enormous projects in this country, like the Piraeus port or the Hellinikon, a sort of Monaco in the heart of Athens. And, well, what's the result of all this? Well, last June, Athens vetoed a EU resolution that condemned the violation of rights in China, and it's not for the first time. Anyway, China is still facing real challenges. Perhaps the biggest of these is its aging population. I mean, just have a look at this chart. But despite this, the influence of China in international politics will grow quite a lot in the next few years, and China is already a new superpower. And well, that's our opinion at VisualPolitik, and now we'd love to know yours. Do you think China is a superpower or just a flash in the pan? And do you think China should be included in the international community to a greater extent? Well, as always, you can leave your answer in the comments below or in the survey, and don't forget to hit that like button if you enjoyed this video, and subscribe for new videos every Monday and Thursday. Further, do not forget to check out our friends at the Reconsider Media podcast. They provided the vocals in this video that were not mine, and as always, thank you for watching.